Melkor, the original Dark Lord of Middle-earth. After sowing discord in the creation of the world, he goes on to wreak havoc upon its inhabitants. Today on Nerd of the Rings, we begin our look at the entire life of Tolkien's most evil and most powerful Dark Lord. In the beginning, Eru Ilúvatar, the god of Tolkien's world, creates the Ainur, that is the Valar and the Maiar. Melkor is among the Valar, and the mightiest of them all. In his impatience to fill the void with created life, he searches throughout the void for the flame imperishable, the mysterious power of Eru that allows him to create and give life. Melkor is unable to locate the flame imperishable, as it is not located in the void, but with Eru himself. You're likely familiar with the other name for the flame imperishable, the secret fire, which Gandalf references during his fight with the Balrog. As Melkor wanders through the void, he comes to have ideas different than those of the other Ainur. He grows rebellious against Eru, and wishes to create life himself. Without the flame imperishable, however, he is unable to create life, but can merely corrupt and twist it, as we will see later. When it comes time for the creation of the universe, the Ainur make a great music. At this time, Melkor weaves his own thoughts into his song, which clashes with the theme of Ilúvatar. This causes some of the Ainur around him to change their music to his. For a time, the theme of Ilúvatar and the discord of Melkor battle one another. Eru smiles and sends forth a second theme. Most of the Ainur join this new theme, but Melkor opposes it even more violently with his discord. Finally, shocked at what they are witnessing, many of the Ainur stop singing and Melkor's discord gains the upper hand. Eru then begins a third theme, sweeter and more beautiful than the previous two. This theme cannot be beaten by Melkor. Still, he opposes the music of Eru. Finally, Eru stops the music completely with a single chord of his own. As we read in the Silmarillion, the music ceased. Then Ilúvatar spoke, and he said, "Mighty are the Ainur, and mightiest among them is Melkor, but that he may know, and all the Ainur, that I am Ilúvatar. Those things that ye have sung, I will show them forth, that ye may see what ye have done. And thou, Melkor, shalt see that no theme may be played that hath not its uttermost source in me, nor can any alter the music in my despite. For he that attempteth this shall prove but mine instrument in the devising of things more wonderful, which he himself hath not imagined." Melkor is shamed and angered by this rebuke, but hides his feelings. As the Ainur see the work of their song, Melkor is among those who beg Eru to allow them to enter Arda. Melkor pretends to have a desire to guide the world and its inhabitants for Eru's glory, but secretly, he desires to dominate Arda and its creatures, especially the forthcoming Children of Ilúvatar, that is, the elves and men. Along with the other Valar, Melkor enters Ea, the created universe, and makes his way to Arda, the world. After they arrive, Melkor drops his facade, declaring to the other Valar that he is now master of Arda. Manwë, who is Melkor's brother, fears that Melkor will attempt to disrupt their labors in Arda, and calls forth more Ainur to protect them. Melkor leaves, making his way to the remote regions of Ea. As the Valar work to form Arda, Melkor seeks to destroy or taint anything they create. He demolishes their mountains, razes their valleys, and spills their seas. Aule's works are among the most affected by Melkor's deeds. After uncounted battles and years pass, news reaches the Ainur who remained with Eru. Hearing of the war, Tulkas, the most warlike of all the Valar, comes to Arda in the Valiant year 1499. Melkor flees before the laughter and anger of Tulkas, escaping beyond the walls of night. From that moment on, he will forever possess a hatred of Tulkas. Now I want to give some context for how time is measured during this age of the Earth. Valiant years equal just over 9.5 of our own years. So from the Valar arriving in Arda in Valiant year 1 to Melkor fleeing in Valiant year 1499, well over 14,000 years pass. As the remaining Valar work to restore Arda as best they can, Melkor dwells in the outer darkness. The Valar complete Arda and raise up 2 lamps which give the world light. They dwell in a land called Almaren. Unfortunately, Melkor's power earns him a following among some of the Maiar, which at this time likely includes Sauron. Some act as his spies, and eventually, he meets with them as the Valar hold a feast after completing their work. It is at this feast that Tulkas marries Nessa. As Nessa dances before the Valar, Tulkas falls into a peaceful sleep. Melkor, looking down in hatred, decides his time to strike has come. Melkor and his followers come over the walls of night, returning to Arda. He delves deep into the earth, creating the fortress of Utumno in the Iron Mountains of the north. Evil flows from the fortress. Death and illness strike at the vegetation of Arda. Animals fight and kill one another, and the Valar come to realize Melkor has returned. The Valar begin to search for Melkor's hiding place, but the future Dark Lord strikes first. He comes to Almaren and destroys the city and the 2 lamps. But Melkor assailed the lights of Iluin and Ormal, and cast down their pillars and broke their lamps. In the overflow of the mighty pillars, lands were broken and seas arose in tumult. And when the lamps were spilled, destroying flame was poured out over the earth. And the shape of Arda and the symmetry of its waters and its lands was marred in that time, so that the first designs of the Valar were never restored. As the world is filled with fire and water and chaos, Melkor escapes, returning to his fortress. The spring of Arda, what should have been a joyous occasion, ends in disaster, as the Valar must use all their power to hold the world together. With their home destroyed, the Valar travel across the sea and come to a new land, Aman. There, they build the city of Valmar and create new sources of light, the 2 trees. This ushers in a new era for Arda, the years of the trees. These are measured in the same manner as Valian years, every year being 9.5 of our own. Once we make our way into the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd ages, the years of Middle-earth are equal to our own. With the Valar now across the sea, Melkor is relatively free to roam Middle-earth, though some among the Valar appear in Middle-earth to thwart him as they are able. One is Ulmo, who will come into play quite a bit during the First Age. Yavanna is also mentioned as taking action in Middle-earth, and Orome, the huntsman, would ride throughout Middle-earth, delighting in hunting down and killing the monsters of Melkor. Believing the Valar might move against him, Melkor dwells in his fortress, building his strength and breeding monsters. He also gathers the Maiar who are loyal to him. These servants, cloaking themselves in shadow and flame, come to be known as Balrogs. During this time, he also constructs the fortress of Angband, where he places his greatest servant, Sauron. In the year of the trees 1050, the first elves awake at Cuiviénen. While the hunter Orome comes across them, so does Melkor. He racks the elves with fear, killing or capturing many in his time. Through the torture of his captives and other foul works, it is believed Melkor creates the race of orcs. After the Valar discover the elves, Manwë concludes it is the will of Eru to reclaim the lands of Middle-earth from Melkor. The Valar come to Middle-earth in the year of the trees 1090 to do battle with Melkor. This massive War of the Gods begins with an army of the West confronting Melkor's forces in the northwest of Middle-earth. The entire region is ruined by the battle. The Valar are victorious in this first battle as the servants of Melkor retreat to Utumno. For the next 2 years, the Valar place guards in the land around the Bay of Cuiviénen, protecting the elves who had first awakened there. The Valar lay siege to Melkor's fortress. From where they stand, far away from the conflict, the elves can see only fires in the north and feel a mighty shaking of the earth. Finally, in the year of the trees 1099, the Valar break the gates and roof of Utumno. Melkor hides in the deepest pits of his fortress, but Tulkas arrives and binds him in the chain Ainur, which Aule the smith had forged. While Utumno is destroyed in this final act, the Valar don't discover all the deepest, darkest places within. Sauron and many of the Balrogs manage to escape capture. In the aftermath of this long war, Middle-earth is changed. New mountain ranges are raised up, the Great Sea becomes larger, and new lands and waterways take shape. The Valar drew Melkor back to Valinor, bound hand and foot and blindfold, and he was brought to the Ring of Doom. There, he lay upon his face before the feet of Manwë, and sued for pardon. But his prayer was denied, and he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos, whence none can escape, neither Vala, nor elf, nor mortal man. Vast and strong are those halls, and they were built in the west of the land of Aman. There was Melkor doomed to abide for 3 ages long, before his cause should be tried anew, or he should plead again for pardon. So Melkor is imprisoned within the halls of Mandos, roughly 2,850 years. All the while, he plots his revenge. As this time passes, many of the elves would come to dwell in Aman. This is a large topic in itself, so we'll cover it in a future video. After the 3 ages pass, Melkor is once again brought before his brother. Melkor bows down, prostrating himself once again before Manwë, begging for pardon. Manwë releases him from his captivity, much to the displeasure of Tulkas and Ulmo. The Valar decree that he will not return to Middle-earth, instead staying in Aman, where they can keep watch on him. In secret, Melkor begins working to corrupt the elves, for whom he holds a grudge, as it was for their safety that the Valar came to Middle-earth to overthrow him. As Melkor assesses the elves, he realizes the Vanyar, the elves that would forever dwell in Aman, do not trust him. The Teleri, who you may remember as being known for their shipbuilding, Melkor deems too weak to be effective in his plans. In the Noldor, however, he finds a curious people who are eager to learn from the Valar, even himself. In the year of the trees 1169, one among the Noldor is born who would be Melkor's most bitter enemy, but also his greatest tool for his evil purposes. Feanor, the creator of the Palantiri, and most importantly, the Silmarils, 3 great gems which shone with the light of the 2 trees. Melkor begins to spread rumors throughout the Noldor. He tells of Middle-earth and its wide lands, realms they would be free to rule were it not for the Valar keeping them in Aman. This distrust of the Valar and desire to rule takes hold in the hearts of many of the Noldor, especially Feanor. Melkor sows even more discord within the House of Finwë between Feanor and his younger half-brother, Fingolfin. Manipulating Feanor's pride and quick temper, Melkor convinces Feanor that Fingolfin plans to usurp his place as their father's heir and take the Silmarils from him. After Feanor threatens to kill Fingolfin in 1490, the Valar banish him to Formenos, where he takes the Silmarils as well. In solidarity, Finwë also moves to Formenos to be with his son. Realizing that Melkor was pulling the strings in this feud, Tulkas goes to imprison him, but finds him gone. 2 years of the trees later, Melkor reappears at Formenos, seeking to further influence Feanor. This time, however, Morgoth goes too far and Feanor recognizes Melkor for what he is. Feanor's heart was still bitter at his humiliation before Mandos, and he looked at Melkor in silence, pondering if indeed he might yet trust him so far as to aid him in his flight. And Melkor, seeing that Feanor wavered, and knowing that the Silmarils held his heart in thrall, said at the last, "Here is a strong place, and well guarded, but think not that the Silmarils will lie safe in any treasury within the realm of the Valar." But his cunning overreached his aim. His words touched too deep, and awoke a fire more fierce than he designed. And Feanor looked upon Melkor with eyes that burned through his fair semblance, and pierced the cloaks of his mind, perceiving there his fierce lust for the Silmarils. Feanor slams the door in his face, and Melkor flees once again, making his way south to the Valley of Avathar. There he finds a mysterious dark spirit which takes the form of a giant spider, Ungoliant. Melkor promises her rich reward for her assistance, and she weaves a cloak of shadow around Melkor and herself to hide them in their travels. In 1495, the Valar seek reconciliation with the Noldor, and between Feanor and Fingolfin. They all assemble in Valmar. Meanwhile, Melkor and Ungoliant make their way to the 2 trees. And in that very hour, Melkor and Ungoliant came hastening over the fields of Valinor, as the shadow of a black cloud upon the wind fleets over the sunlit earth. And they came before the green mound Ezelohar. Then the unlight of Ungoliant rose up even to the roots of the trees, and Melkor sprang upon the mound, and with his black spear he smote each tree to its core, wounded them deep, and their sap poured forth as if it were their blood, and was spilled upon the ground. But Ungoliant sucked it up, and going then from tree to tree, she set her black beak to their wounds, till they were drained, and the poison of death that was in her went into their tissues and withered them, root, branch, and leaf, and they died. The light of the trees extinguished, the world is once again plunged into darkness. After Ungoliant drinks the entirety of the wells of Varda, they go north to Formenos. There, Melkor kills Finwë and steals the Silmarils and other gems of Feanor. Ungoliant, who grows in size after consuming the sap of the two trees, flees with Melkor across the Helcaraxe and into Middle-earth. Once they arrive, Ungoliant, in her insatiable hunger, demands Melkor give her the treasure. Melkor, who is now very weak from his deeds, fears the monstrous spider. He gives her each of the gems of Feanor as she, in turn, consumes each one. She then demands the Silmarils, but Melkor refuses. Ungoliant uses her webs to trap the Vala and nearly devours him. Melkor gives a great cry which summons the Balrogs from Angband. With their whips, they drive away Ungoliant and return their master to what remains of his old fortress. There, Melkor sets the Silmarils in an iron crown, which from that moment onward, he will never willingly remove. This despite the fact that the crown is a great burden to him. Back in Aman, Feanor returns to Formenos to find his father slain and the Silmarils gone. Feanor curses Melkor and gives him a new name, which the elves and men will forever know him by, a name meaning black foe or dark tyrant. The Vala Melkor is now known as the Dark Lord Morgoth. As Feanor claims kingship of the Noldor and leads many to Middle-earth, Morgoth, in his fortress of Angband, the Silmarils upon his crown, declares himself king of all the world. For the next 600 years, the elves and Morgoth would be at war. After his return to Middle-earth, he is often referred to as Morgoth Bauglir. Bauglir is a Sindarin name, meaning the constrainer. He sets his sights on the elves that didn't make the journey to Valinor. The Sindar, under King Thingol, live in Doriath. Círdan and the Teleri live at Falas, and Denethor and the Nandor live in Osiriand. Morgoth moves against these elves in the year of the trees 1497, sending his army of orcs to surround Thingol in Doriath. Thingol manages to contact Denethor, who comes to their aid. The orcs of Morgoth, caught between two armies of elves, are defeated. As the orcs flee north, they are unexpectedly routed by the dwarves of Mount Dolmed. The orcs on the western front continue to besiege Círdan's elves at the havens of Falas for the following few months, until the coming of the Noldor would draw them away. Speaking of the Noldor, with the world in darkness, Feanor leads the Noldor to rebel against the Valar. Many of those following Feanor take part in the kinslaying, in which many Teleri are killed so that Feanor may claim their ships. They sail east to Beleriand, landing at Losgар. When Feanor burns the ships, it not only signals to Fingolfin that he and the rest of the Noldor are now stranded in Aman, but also draws the attention of Morgoth. In a preemptive strike, he sends forth a force of orcs and werewolves, which passes through the arid Wethrin and attacks the elves. Though the orcs greatly outnumber the Noldor, the elves possess great power within them, thanks to the light of Valinor. They defeat Morgoth's force. The orcs retreat across the plain of Ardgallen and back toward Angband. At this time, the orcs that had besieged Círdan come north to aid their allies. However, they are pushed back to the Fen of Serek. In total, very few orcs survive the 10-day battle. Feanor pursues this small group to the Dor Daedeloth, the land of the shadow of horror. There, the Balrogs come out from Thangorodrim, Feanor fights valiantly against these demons of Morgoth, but is separated from his sons and is fatally wounded by Gothmog, the Lord of Balrogs. The armies of his sons would reach him just in time to drive off the Balrogs, but Morgoth's enemy would die of his wounds soon after. This conflict would come to be known as the Dagor Nuin Gileath, the Battle Under Stars, as it takes place prior to the creation of the sun and moon. With his father dead, Maethrost is now the High King of the Noldor. Morgoth sends an offer of peace to Maethrost, even saying he will surrender a Silmaril. Maethrost does not trust the Dark Lord and brings a force with him to the meeting. Morgoth sends an even greater force and captures Maethrost, the sole survivor of his group. Morgoth tells the Noldor to leave Beleriand and forsake their war against him. However, the sons of Feanor are bound to their oath to make war on anyone who should withhold the Silmarils from them. Morgoth hangs Maethrost upon a precipice of Thangorodrim by the wrist of his right hand, and there he would hang for the next 30 years. The rest of the Noldor arrive around the time the sun and the moon are created by the Valar, making this year one of the First Age of Middle-earth. This group is led by Feanor's half-brother and Galadriel's uncle, Fingolfin, who would become Morgoth's next challenger. In the year 5 of the First Age, Fingolfin's son Fingon, with the help of Thorondor, the Lord of the Great Eagles, rescues Maethrost from Thangorodrim. Maethrost renounces his claim to the kingship of the Noldor, and Fingolfin is made the new High King. Over the coming years, Morgoth's spies believe that as the elves are making their settlements, they aren't prepared for military conflict. Morgoth sends out an army of orcs to attack. The main host attacks Dorthonion, while smaller groups go through Maglor's Gap and the Pass of Sirion. The Noldor, however, were anything but unprepared. While the orcs in the east and west are destroyed by smaller elven forces, Fingolfin in the west and Maethrost in the east strike back at the main host of the invading orc army. Most of Morgoth's force is defeated there in Dorthonion, with a small remnant fleeing toward Angband. The elves chase them down, and there, within the sight of Thangorodrim itself, the Noldor slay the remaining orcs. This battle is known as the Dagor Agreleb, the Glorious Battle, as it is a huge victory for the elves. The Noldor set as much a border around Morgoth's land as possible, thus beginning the 400-year Siege of Angband. During this time, Morgoth comes to realize orcs alone will not defeat the Noldor, so he devises new creatures of evil, the dragons. The first of these is Glaurung, who emerges without Morgoth's permission in 260 of the First Age. Despite an initial success, the young dragon is humbled by the elven archers and forced to flee back to Angband. Nearly 200 years later, however, as Glaurung is grown to his full might, Morgoth sends forth great rivers of fire over Ardgallen, burning many elves stationed throughout the land. As the elves are in disarray, Glaurung leads a force of Balrogs and an army of orcs, killing all in their sight. This battle can be looked at on two fronts, the east and the west. In the west, Galadriel's brothers Angrod and Agnor are killed fighting for their home realm of Dorthonion. Finrod, her last remaining sibling and Lord of Nargothrond, would have been killed as he is surrounded at the Fen of Serek, but a group of men led by Barahir, a lord of the House of Beor, comes to their aid. Finrod would later give him a ring as a token of the everlasting friendship between their families, the Ring of Barahir, which would one day pass to Aragorn. In the end, the elves and men are able to keep the western realms of Hithlum safe. In the east, things do not go so well. This battle, known as the Dagor Bragolach, the Battle of Sudden Flame, not only costs many lives of elves and men, but it also breaks the Siege of Angband, and allows Morgoth's forces to move freely throughout the north of Beleriand. Orcs take control of the lands of Lothlin, including the important positions of Maglor's Gap and Mount Rerir. Glaurung burns the lands between the arms of Gelion, and the Thargelion and Lake Helivorn are ravaged by Morgoth's forces. With many refugees fleeing to places like Doriath and Hithlum, the elves abandon their realm of Dorthonion, which becomes known as Tar Nufuin, Forest Under Nightshade. After a year of smaller battles, the High King Fingolfin gets word of the devastation the war has wrought in Dorthonion and Lothlin. Seeing what he believes could be the utter ruin of the Noldor, He rides in anger across the scorched land of Anfauglith, coming to the very door of Angband to confront Morgoth. Thus he came alone to Angband's gates, and he sounded his horn and smote once more upon the brazen doors, and challenged Morgoth to come forth to single combat. And Morgoth came. That was the last time in those wars that he passed the doors of his stronghold, and it is said that he took not the challenge willingly, for alone of the Valar he knew fear. But he could not now deny the challenge before the face of his captains, for Fingolfin named Morgoth craven. Therefore Morgoth issued forth, clad in black armor, and he stood before the king like a tower, iron-crowned, and his vast shield, sable unblazoned, cast a shadow over him like a storm cloud. But Fingolfin gleamed beneath it as a star, for his mail was overlaid with silver, and his blue shield was set with crystals, and he drew his sword Ringil, that glittered like ice. Then Morgoth hurled aloft Grond, the hammer of the underworld, and swung it down like a bolt of thunder, but Fingolfin sprang aside, and Grond rent a mighty pit in the earth. Many times Morgoth essayed to smite him, and each time Fingolfin leaped away, and he wounded Morgoth with 7 wounds, and 7 times Morgoth gave a cry of anguish, whereat the hosts of Angband fell upon their faces in dismay, and the cries echoed in the Northlands. But at last the king grew weary, and Morgoth bore down his shield upon him. Thrice he was crushed to his knees, and thrice rose again, and bore up his broken shield and stricken helm. But the earth was all pitted around him, and he stumbled and fell backward before the feet of Morgoth. And Morgoth set his left foot upon his neck, yet with his last and desperate stroke, Fingolfin hewed the foot with Ringil, and the blood gushed forth, black and smoking, and filled the pits of Grond. As he wounds the Dark Lord, Fingolfin dies. While he's victorious, Morgoth would not escape this battle unscathed. As he breaks the body of Fingolfin, he intends to feed it to his wolves. However, in that moment, Thorondor, the Lord of the Great Eagles, flies in and claws the face of Morgoth. He takes the body of Fingolfin and sets it upon a mountaintop overlooking the hidden city of Gondolin. King Turgon learns of his father's deeds from the Great Eagle and builds a cairn over Fingolfin. Morgoth is scarred from Thorondor's attack and forever bears a limp from the wound of Fingolfin's blade. 10 years later, in 466, 2 others would come to Angband, Beren and Luthien. When Beren, a man, and Luthien, an elf, wished to be married, Luthien's father, King Thingol of Doriath, declares that Beren may only have his daughter's hand if Beren succeeds in reclaiming a Silmaril from Morgoth's crown. Beren embarks on a mission to do just that, and after being rescued from the dungeons of Sauron in Tolin Gawroth by Luthien and Huon the Hound, the 3 make their way to Angband, disguised by the power of Luthien. They enter the very throne room of Morgoth, and as the Dark Lord is about to order them seized, Luthien weaves a spell and begins to dance. The spell puts Morgoth and his entire court into a deep sleep. Beren approaches Morgoth. Using his knife, he cuts a Silmaril from the Iron Crown. He decides to retrieve all 3 Silmarils, but as he is cutting a second loose, the knife breaks and a shard strikes Morgoth in the face. As the court begins to stir, Beren and Luthien flee for their lives. Now I'll be covering the life of Beren and Luthien in next week's video, but this particular Silmaril is never brought back to Morgoth, though it would cause further conflict with the Dark Lord and within the forces of his enemies. It is upon hearing the deeds of Beren and Luthien that 2 alone could successfully retrieve a Silmaril from Angband that moves Mithras in 468 to create an alliance to attack Morgoth. In 469, Morgoth sends forth a wind from Angband. It comes to the lands that border Anfauglith, in particular the lands to the west, like Dorlomin. This plague, known as the Evil Breath, particularly affects the young, and many die from it, including Lalaith, the 3-year-old daughter of Hurin, the Lord of Dorlomin. The men of Dorlomin would join many others in the Union of Mithras, and in 472, fight in what would be one of the most important conflicts of the First Age, the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. The Union of Maethros consists of two armies, one in the west, one in the east. In the west, Fingon leads the Noldor of Hithlum, Hurin and Huor lead the Edain of Dorlomin, Haldir, the man, not the elf of the Third Age, leads the Edain of Brethil, Gwyndor leads the elves of Nargothrond, and there were also a few scattered elves from Falas and Doriath, including Mablung and Beleg Strongbow. In the east, Maethros commands his elven host. They are joined by Azagal and the dwarves of Belegost. They also had two groups of men with them, who had recently relocated to Beleriand after the Dagor Bragalach. These men, known as Easterlings, are under the command of their leaders Bor and Uldor. The plan is simple. The forces of the east would march to Anfauglith. Their hope is that Morgoth would respond by sending his armies to meet them. The western host would remain hidden in the woods and valleys east of the arid Wethrin. There they would await a signal. A great beacon in Dorthonion would fire, at which point the western host would charge, and they would crush the forces of Morgoth, as if caught between hammer and anvil. As Maethros leads his force to Anfauglith, a dark cloud gathers around Thangorodrim. Morgoth has accepted the challenge. As the western host waits, they are joined, unexpectedly, by a host of 10,000 elves, led by Turgon, brother of Fingon and king of the hidden city of Gondolin. Their might greatly increased, the outlook is promising for the Union of Maethros. However, in that very hour, Morgoth implements his plan. A great host issues from Angband to meet Maethros, but at the same time, a smaller host is sent west with the task of provoking the western army. Fingon orders his troops to hold until the orcs attempt to attack the hills on which they stand. At this point, the orcs bring forth Gelmir, the brother of Gwyndor. Having been already blinded, his arms and legs are hewn from his body. Filled with rage, Gwyndor and his soldiers charge at the orcs. Fingon's force follows, and they quickly defeat the smaller host and strike upon the very gates of Angband. In this moment, Morgoth once again knows fear, shaking upon his throne as Gwyndor's elves pound on the gates and kill his guards. However, the Dark Lord's trap was now sprung. Thousands of orcs erupt from hidden tunnels and gates around Angband, killing the entire force, with the exception of Gwyndor, who is captured. Fingon's host is driven back from the walls. Turgon, who had held back from the reckless charge of Gwyndor, drives into the orc host and breaks their lines, meeting with the host of Fingon. Finally, Maethros arrives at what is now the main concentration of the battle. However, before he can join with Fingon and Turgon, Morgoth unleashes the last of his strength. All of Angband is emptied as wolves, balrogs, and dragons join the fray. Though daunting, it is said in this moment the battle could still have been won, but for Morgoth's secret weapon. Uldor and his group of Easterlings turn against Maethros. While the Easterlings under Bor would remain faithful to the elves, the damage has been done. With assault coming from three sides, the eastern host is scattered. The valiant dwarves of Belegost hold off Glaurung, allowing the sons of Feanor to escape into Osiriant. As the dwarves in their iron masks fight the dragon and his fire, Azagal is trampled by Glaurung. The dying king stabs the dragon in the stomach with a dagger, and Glaurung and many others flee. The western host fared no better. Gothmog, the lord of Balrogs, makes his way to Fingon and kills him in single combat. Seeing the battle is lost, Hurin begs Turgon to retreat back to Gondolin. With Fingon dead, he knows Turgon is the last of the house of Fingolfin. If the land of Gondolin can remain hidden, and the son of Fingon who had maimed him survived, Morgoth would still know fear. Hurin and Huor and the men of Dorlomin form a living wall across the fen of Serek, giving time for Turgon to escape with what remains of the elves of Gondolin, and those who followed his brother. Nearly every single man is killed. Huor is killed when shot in the eye with an arrow, and Hurin fights to the very last. As Morgoth had been ordered for him to be taken alive, Hurin continues fighting until his axe withers away. In total, he kills at least 70 orcs and trolls before being pinned under their corpses. The orcs make a pile of bodies on the plains of Anfauglith of the men and elves that were killed. The mound was so large it could be seen from a great distance. Thereafter, grass grew on that hill alone in all the desolation of Anfauglith, and it is known as the Haud en Nirnaeth, the Hill of Tears. The Nirnaeth Arnoediad is a devastating loss for the elves, men, and dwarves of Middle-earth. In the years and decades to come, it will often be referred to with great sadness and acknowledging this as the moment when Morgoth assumed his control over the entire north of Beleriand. Soon he will press his advantage even further, but first he will lay a curse upon his prized captive, Hurin, that will shape the world for years to come. In the aftermath of the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, a massive victory for the Dark Lord, the northern lands of the elves and men are now under Morgoth's control. Turgon, now High King of the Noldor, and his hidden city of Gondolin stand as the only reason for Morgoth to doubt his odds for total conquest. In the aftermath of the Nirnaeth, Morgoth takes his captive Hurin to a seat in the high places of Thangorodrim and pronounces a curse upon him and his family.
I am the Elder King, Melkor, first and mightiest of the Valar, who was before the world and made it. The shadow of my purpose lies upon Arda, and all that is in it bends slowly and surely to my will. But upon all whom you love my thought shall weigh as a cloud of doom, and it shall bring them down into darkness and despair. Wherever they go, evil shall arise. Whenever they speak, their words shall bring ill counsel. Whatsoever they do shall turn against them. They shall die without hope, cursing both life and death.
This last I say to you, thrall Morgoth, said Hurin, and it comes not from the lore of the Eldar, but is put into my heart this hour. You are not the lord of men and shall not be, though all Arda and Menel fall in your dominion. Beyond the circles of the world you shall not pursue those who refuse you.
Beyond the circles of the world I will not pursue them,
said Morgoth.
For beyond the circles of the world there is nothing, but within them they shall not escape me until they enter into nothing.
You lie, said Hurin.
You shall see, and you shall confess that I do not lie,
said Morgoth, and taking Hurin back to Angband, he set him in a chair of stone upon a high place of Thangorodrim, from which he could see afar the land of Hithlum in the west and the lands of Beleriand in the south. There he was bound by the power of Morgoth, and Morgoth standing beside him cursed him again and set his power upon him, so that he could not move from that place or die until Morgoth should release him.
Sit now there,
said Morgoth,
and look out upon the lands where evil and despair shall come upon those whom you have delivered to me. For you have dared to mock me, and have questioned the power of Melkor, master of the fates of Arda. Therefore with my eyes you shall see, and with my ears you shall hear, and nothing shall be hidden from you.
As I mentioned earlier, Morgoth now has complete dominion over the north of Beleriand. He gives to the Easterlings that served him the lands of Hithlum, denying them the more fertile lands to the south which he had promised them. Many of the elves and men that had remained in Hithlum are sent as thralls to work the mines of Angband. In 473, a year after the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, Morgoth's forces attack and destroy the havens of Falas. Círdan and his people flee to the mouth of Sirion. In the coming years, Morgoth's forces would continue to overthrow realms of men and elves, though Turin, son of Hurin, and Beleg Strongbow in particular would cause much trouble to his orcs. In 489, his orcs defeat the pair when they sack their hideout at Aman-Ruth. We'll go into much greater detail on Turin's life in his own video, but we'll mention a couple things as they pertain to Morgoth and his campaign against the realms that remain standing. Through a tragic accident, Turin kills Beleg, mistaking him for an orc. Turin then comes to Nargothrond, where he becomes an advisor to King Orodreth. At Turin's behest, Orodreth ignores the advice of the Vala Ulmo, saying to destroy the bridge and fortify the city. Instead, Turin opts for open war with the armies of Angband. Morgoth sends out Glaurung the dragon once again with a force of orcs. They defeat the army of Nargothrond and sack the city. 10 years later, in 499, after a life of deeds gone awry by the curse of Morgoth, Turin kills himself upon his own sword. This victory would come at a great cost to the Dark Lord, however, as Turin had first killed the dragon Glaurung at Cabed and Arras, not far from the crossing of Teglin. After the death of Turin and his sister Nienor, Morgoth releases Hurin, but the curse would yet follow him. Hurin travels about Beleriand searching for his kin, eventually discovering his wife at the graves of his children. His wife dies, and after burying her, Hurin comes to Nargothrond, where he discovers the Nauglamir, a great necklace made by the dwarves. He takes it to Doriath, where, in his anger that Thingol had not better cared for his son, he throws it down in front of the king. This would be yet another example of the evil and shadow of Morgoth having a far reach, as his curse would result in yet another realm's downfall. Thingol takes the Nauglamir and tasks a group of dwarves with setting the Silmaril of Beren and Luthien within the necklace. The dwarves come to covet their creation and kill Thingol, leading to the sack of Menegroth in 503. Just a few years later, the Oath of Feanor would rear its ugly head again, as the sons of Feanor, driven by their oath, take part in the second kinslaying in an effort to reclaim the Silmaril from their fellow elves. This would result in the kingdom of Doriath being completely destroyed, and yet another of Morgoth's enemies is removed. The Silmaril, however, would evade both the sons of Feanor and Morgoth. Elwing, the daughter of King Dior, is among those who escape to the havens of Sirion when she is just 4 years old. Meanwhile, in the north of Beleriand stood the one last bastion of hope for the free peoples, Gondolin. Outside of the hidden city, Meglin, one of the elves of Gondolin, is captured by orcs and brought to Angband. Morgoth promises Meglin the kingship of Gondolin and the hand of Idril, the woman he loves. All he must do is reveal the secret location of the city. In the greatest betrayal of the First Age, Meglin agrees, and Morgoth finally has the information he has long sought. In 510, as the Gondolodrim are celebrating the festival of the Gates of Summer, they gather to watch the sunrise over the mountains. However, rather than seeing light arise in the east, they see light in the north. The armies of Morgoth, orcs, wolves, dragons, balrogs, and other creatures descend upon the city. While Gothmog would fall in battle, it is an overwhelming victory for the Dark Lord. King Turgon, the Lord Ecthelion, Glorfindel, and the vast majority of the population are killed in the battle. Gondolin, the last hope of the elves, is no more. One of the very few survivors is the 7-year-old elf Eärendil, who, along with the others, would make his way south to the havens of Sirion. There he would meet Elwing. Decades later, they would be married and have twin sons, Elrond and Elros. 6 years later, the sons of Feanor would once again be led by their oath to slay their own kin. In the third kinslaying, Elwing escapes with the Silmaril and is taken on her husband's ship as they sail to the west, in a stroke that would change the fortunes of the world. They come to Valinor, and Eärendil pleads with the Valar, and Eärendil went into Valinor and to the halls of Valimar, and never again set foot upon the lands of men. Then the Valar took counsel together, and they summoned Ulmo from the depths of the sea, and Eärendil stood before their faces and delivered the errand of the two kindreds. Pardon he asked for the Noldor, and pity for their great sorrows, and mercy upon men and elves, and succor in their need. And his prayer was granted. The Valar send forth a great host of Valinor, which lands in Beleriand in 545. Included in the host are the Vanyar, led by Ingwion, the Noldor of Valinor under Finarfin, Eonwe, the chief of the Maiar, and possibly other Maiar and even some Valar. It is said that the whole power of the throne of Morgoth is assembled. The armies of Morgoth are uncountable. The mountains rang underneath the boots of the Valar. The entire north of Beleriand is aflame with war for 42 years. In the final years of the battle, Morgoth is facing defeat. In his final act of desperation, he summons the winged dragons, never before seen in Middle-earth. The dragons are led by Ancalagon the Black, the largest and most powerful dragon to ever live. The tide turned, the host of Valinor is driven back, and their outlook is bleak, as so many of the battles that had come before against the Dark Lord. It is in this moment when Eärendil, wearing the Silmaril upon his brow, arrives in his ship. The ship, having been blessed by the Valar, sails not the seas, but the skies. With Eärendil is Thorondor and flocks of the great eagles. Together they battle the dragons for an entire day. In the end, Eärendil kills Ancalagon, who breaks the towers of Thangorodrim in his ruin. As the host of Valinor retakes the battlefield and defeats his army force by force, Morgoth flees to the deepest dungeons of Angband. There he is caught, but being weak from the war, he demands peace and parley rather than fight. But his feet are hewn from under him. Morgoth falls upon the floor where he is bound once again in the chain of Aule. The 2 Silmarils are taken from him, and he is thrust through the door of night and into the timeless void. While Morgoth is removed from Beleriand, his effects are far from gone. As a result of the battle, most of Beleriand is destroyed. The wreckage of the war is so great that soon after, all of the lands west of the arid Luin, along with a central portion of the Blue Mountains, sink into the sea. Many of the elves make the journey back to Aman, while some, such as Galadriel, Gil-galad, Círdan, and Elrond, travel east. There, in the ages to come, they would face a new Dark Lord, Sauron, the lieutenant of Morgoth, who had fled to the east. As for the original Dark Lord, he would not be heard from again in recorded history. However, it is prophesied that Morgoth will one day break the door of night, and there shall be one final battle, the Dagor-Dagorath, the battle of all battles, a final confrontation between good and evil on the very plains of Valinor. Tolkien wrote many versions regarding the Dagor-Dagorath, leaving some details up for debate and speculation, including the idea that it would be Turin who would deal the final blow, killing Morgoth himself and avenging the children of Hurin. In the end, the lands of Beleriand will be lifted up from the sea and the world rebuilt, with the dwarves helping their creator Aule in doing so. The dwarves will then be counted among the children of Iluvatar, and then shall take place the second song of the Ainur, this time with the children of Iluvatar joining in the music, ushering in a new world. As always, I want to say a huge thank you to all my Patreon and YouTube supporters who make this channel possible. Tom DeBombadil19, Lissamy the Cinda, Rabbi Rob Thomas, Charles Leisure, CCDC Red Team, Joe Tepper, Leo Vittori, Sky Carcass, Slide Belts, Dane Ragnarsson, Berto Berg, Graham Derricott, The Dark-Haired One, Wyland, Micah Wu, and Debbie. If you enjoyed the artwork in this video, check out the artists in the description to purchase prints of their great work for yourself. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next time on Nerd of the Rings.